Welcome to Back from the Abyss. This is a place for stories of hope and healing, recovery and redemption. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. There are still a few spots left in my intensive psychotherapy workshop in June, geared for psychiatric NPs and PAs. It's called Bringing Therapy into Med Management. It will run June 3 through 6 here in Fort Collins. This is a chance to learn how to break out of the short-sighted and terribly limited med management model into a more holistic, psychodynamic, and patient-centered way of practicing. Check out my website for more details and registration. Today's episode focuses on something that almost no one seems to want to talk about. The United States has a major suicide problem, around 50,000 people every year. And 60% of those suicides are gun suicides. The suicide problem in the United States is largely a gun problem. The number one risk factor for completed suicide, it's not depression or anxiety or addiction or akathisia, it's access to means. And it turns out that it's actually not that easy to kill yourself unless you have ready access to a gun. We are finally starting to talk about ways to keep guns out of the hands of potentially suicidal people. And one concrete step in that direction is something called Donna's Law, a program where people can voluntarily be put on a no-sell list during times of psychological crisis or instability. Donna's Law is named after Donna Nathan, who impulsively bought a handgun in 2018 in New Orleans and then shot herself during a period of psychiatric crisis. There were no barriers in place, no waiting period, or a no-sell list. Donna found easy access to means, and she paid the ultimate price. Today, we are first going to hear the voice of Katrina Breeze, Donna's daughter. Katrina tells us more about who Donna was, how she lived, and how she died. And after we hear from Katrina, I will then lead a discussion with two prominent Colorado voices for both Donna's Law in particular and suicide prevention in general. Dr. David Iverson is a Denver-based psychiatrist, a board member of Colorado Ceasefire, and a lifelong advocate for society's most vulnerable folks, including those on the streets or in the justice system. Back from the Abyss listeners might remember him from the homelessness, mental illness, and addiction episode that we did together in December 23. And also, Ginny Mack joins us. She's a Fort Collins-based psychiatric nurse practitioner, a Navy veteran, and a longtime advocate for suicide prevention efforts, both on the state and local level. My conversation with Dave and Ginny starts with each of us sharing how guns and gun suicides have deeply affected our clinical work. This is a heavy topic for sure, but one that I also think is absolutely critical and way past due.
Donna Nathan was my mom. She had this really amazing life in New Orleans. She lived in this beautiful house filled with art in the best neighborhood. She had a boyfriend that she was so in love with, and they had been together for 12 years. She had 4 cats that her life revolved around. She loved to dance. She loved Cajun music and the Beatles. She was a great dancer. She could move to any music. My mom wanted to live so bad. She wanted to keep her life. She wanted to be with her cats. She wanted to see the next grandbaby be born. She really tried everything. She knew that she had suicidality and that it was cyclical. Whenever it hit, our family jumped into action, did everything we could. But mostly she did everything she could. She was smart. She knew how to advocate for herself. She knew how to speak to the doctors. She was confident. But this last time, we kept just getting her back into the psych ward for suicidality over and over again, 3 times in a row. When it came to do it again, my mom told me that she didn't want to go back to jail. And it felt like we ran out of options. Her boyfriend, Pat, quit his job so he could be home with her and protect her, make sure that she was safe. Every day they had their ritual where she would write in her journal and he would write next to her. They both loved writing. At the end, she was calling her psychiatrist, begging for help, emailing him. He didn't take it seriously. He told me later that he didn't see her as high risk. The day that she died, Pat was home with her. She came into his office and said that she was going to go to the mall and buy some clothes. He watched her on the security cameras as she left. She pets the cats on the front porch, and then she gets in the car. Pat knew immediately that she wasn't going to the mall. He called the police, begging for help finding her, help stopping what he knew would happen. There was nothing he could do, so he just kept calling the police all day. He called them 5 times that day, begging for help. The police would eventually get back to him late that night to tell him that my mom was dead. She had shot herself by the Tree of Life at Audubon Park. It seems so weird that she shot herself. It just wasn't her. She hated guns. Our family didn't have guns. It wasn't part of our culture at all. Her Facebook profile had been changed a couple months before to a handgun with a line through it, like, no guns for me. We wouldn't find out till later all that had happened that day. But it started with her Googling the words, how to hang yourself. Google then gave her some articles. The top article, which I could tell that she read, provided a table that analyzed methods of suicide. It told you the failure rate, the pain, the risk, the cost, and ultimately it told her that a handgun was the best choice. She then Googled gun stores, New Orleans, and was directed to the closest gun store where she purchased a gun, a small handgun, and a box of pink breast cancer awareness bullets. We'd later find it all. After her death, when we got her car back in the passenger seat, it felt like a shopping spree. A shopping spree gone wrong. There was so much packaging. Gift bag from the gun store, the box from the handgun, the box from the bullets, 3 business cards from the guy that sold it to her with the phrase, "Because your safety matters," scrawled on it. There was a free gun lock left behind. It was really shocking to know that this man had sold my mom a gun. My mom was experiencing severe tremors. She was having a side effect from a medication that caused suicidality increases and also these awful tremors. She had gotten to the point where she couldn't even hold a fork to eat because she'd stab herself in the face. And so she had to eat with her hands. She could barely write. Her handwriting it looked like there was a vibration in it, and it didn't even look like her hands made it anymore. That was one reason it felt so cruel that this man had sold her a gun. How could he sell a woman a gun that can't even hold her hand straight? I couldn't understand how this could happen. How could my mom, who was just in all these psych wards, come out and walk into a gun store and purchase a gun so fast? I asked around after her death. I asked lawyer friends, and it was all legal. There were no barriers. There was nothing to stop her. There was no law.
So I can still remember the phone call that I received in April of 2016. The student that I had seen just 2 weeks earlier at the clinic, and the same 19-year-old who had laughed with me as he told me stories about how excited he was about his spring break with his friends that was upcoming. And he really seemed to be on board with the medications that we had put in place. And I'd just seen him a couple of times in clinic. And so, he was being treated for bipolar disorder and substance use condition. And he'd been hospitalized a few months earlier and had gone through an intensive outpatient treatment program and really was on board and eager to get better. And I was told on the phone by our director, first of all, she said, "Jenny, are you sitting down?" And I knew right then and there that this was serious. And I found my way to a chair. And she told me that the student, this 19-year-old, he had driven to Wyoming and a week earlier purchased a handgun at a gun show in Cheyenne, and he had shot himself the previous night of this phone call. And so within about a 7-day period, all the hopes and dreams of everything in his future just were tragically destroyed by a gunshot wound to his head. And what made this so hard and this tragedy, this horrific tragedy, so difficult, was that he had periods of stability. Like he had periods where he was doing well and was hopeful about an internship the last time that I saw him alive. And that shook our entire campus clinic and our community. He'd also been working with a counselor in the community. We didn't see this coming. And I think that just the impulsivity of it was so devastating and heart-wrenching and tragic because he wasn't given a second chance because he used a gun.
How about you, Dave? Why does this topic speak to you?
As mental health professionals, I can't think of two more important topics, suicide and the role that guns play. And having been almost entirely in the public sector here in Colorado for 36 years, and watching our mental health system deteriorate, it's a burden. So I've lost clients also to gun suicide and other forms. And we're tortured, as you point out, with, trying to understand what happened, supporting the family. In that regard, these two topics and how they overlap is important for everybody, any human person on the planet. It's been a challenge as long as we've had people. I think the philosopher Camus said, there's really only one philosophical problem, and that's suicide. Mm-hmm. So for me, not just suicide, but homicide as well, it just feels like it's kind of always been around, and I'll list a few issues that have caused me to really try to focus and understand. Even as a kid, I had two friends that their fathers were murdered, one in middle school and one in high school. In medical school, there was a young lady just a year ahead of me in October of 86. Lori Rossetti was abducted and brutally murdered, and that shook, of course, not just our medical school in Chicago, but the whole city. I've worked with patients who have survived the Aurora theater shooting, one that was in the library at Columbine. I have a coworker right now who was a student at Columbine. work at a jail, and I work at a couple of other sites, one of the county jails in Colorado. I evaluated one of Colorado's mass murderers when he was on death row, when we still had death row. And at the homeless clinic, where I've been on and off for many years, we had a shooting in the alley. We had a shooting out front. I was in an office near the windows, and I heard 6 shots, 2 shots, and then a pause, and then 4 in succession. And I'm like, what? And looked out the window, and I could see a young man at the building across the street, and he was pressed against the corner of the building, and he craned his neck around to look down the intersecting street, and he quick jerked it back. And I'm like, oh, bloody hell. So, like a moth to the flame, I went out there, and pretty soon there were emergency vehicles, and cops had it cordoned off. The guy was still sitting upright. He had 6 bullets in him, 2 in his face. And he was able to step and then get onto the gurney to get into the ambulance and head over to Denver Health. And I talked to one of the officers, and he said, yeah, that was a drug deal that went badly. And he said that the victim, he said, is not a nice man. And then lastly, at the jail I'm at now, I mean, some days, I swear it feels like half the people are shooting victims, some with deformities in their limbs or even their face. One I'm working with now who's lost an eye. And the other half are doing the shooting. So it's all very compelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say for me, I've had now 14 suicides. Just counted that up again yesterday. And half of them were by gun. And my most recent suicide was actually one I spoke about last week. I was teaching a workshop in California on transference and countertransference. And on the day about countertransference, I was talking about the risks of having too much positive countertransference with your patients and kind of getting sucked into them and feeling like you know them and you kind of twin with them. So my last guy who killed himself was a runner. I'm a runner. He had little girls. I have big girls. And I remember I knew he really struggled with suicidality, but I really think part of me thought there's no way that he could or would do it. Because he was an amazing runner, better than me, and I just thought that guy knows how to suffer. He won't actually do it. And in a time of really dark suffering, turns out I didn't know this. I'd never asked him this. He had a gun in the home for quote-unquote protection, and he shot himself in front of his family. And it was crushing on so many levels. One, it was a good countertransference lesson for me that I assumed that someone like him couldn't do it, but it was also a real wake-up call that access to means of suicide is the most important thing of all. It's a bigger risk factor than depression or agitation or anxiety or akathisia or anything. If you have a gun in the home, as he did, and in a moment of total despair, he killed himself. So yeah, this topic is very raw and important for me as well. I wonder if we might start, Dave, you've done a ton of policy work. I wonder if we might have you sort of outline the problem here, sort of U.S. suicide, Colorado suicide, gun suicide. And I know there's murder is a whole other thing, but let's for the moment, because Donna's Law has to do with suicide. What are we looking at? What's the scope of the problem? What are some statistics here that might help people understand what we're looking at?
Sure. Suicide is consistently in top 10 of all causes of death, I believe. What's been interesting is I've tried to understand the numbers and the statistics as much as they can help us and guide us and inform us, is Western states almost always fill up the top 10 in suicide rate in the country. And that's been a curiosity, especially living out here in Colorado. People argue about what goes into that. numbers lag, right? With a couple years, usually when you get good numbers in. But I think the CDC told us in 2023 about 49,000, over 49,000 suicides in the country, with a suicide rate of 14.1 per 100,000. And in Colorado, our rate usually runs a little bit higher than the national average for reasons I just mentioned. Homicide runs usually about a third of those suicide numbers. So 22,000 homicides, 22,830 in 2023. In Colorado, 2023, we had 366 homicides. We can't neglect talking about kids. In 2020, it was reported that firearm deaths, gun accidents became the number one leading cause of death for kids, as defined by ages 1 to 19. And that's astonishing and absolutely outrageous. We're a far outlier worldwide, where suicide and homicide is a challenge, of course, with roughly similar sort of breakdown, suicide to homicide. But given our, very dominant gun culture, among other issues, the Second Amendment, et cetera, and just the prevalence of guns, we have now more guns than people, over 400 million guns in the country. They're in about 50% of all households, and that accounts for about 33% or so of Americans own guns, at least 2 to 5 per person. So with our topic today being, what do we do about that, especially when we're mental health professionals that are trying to help people and help people be safe and help people get through crises, help people overcome depression, et cetera, it gives us a lot to chew on.
Mm-hmm. What percent of suicides nationwide are guns? I found some statistics. I'm curious what you found.
Yeah. If someone uses a gun, the numbers like this around suicide, I think, are real interesting. Men are more likely to die of suicide. Women are more likely to attempt. And we can discuss what the reasons for that are. Men are more likely to turn to more lethal means, i.e. guns, jumping, or hanging. Women more likely to turn to means like poisoning, meaning overdose, cutting, what have you. So if a person turns to a gun in a suicide attempt, it's over 90% likely to be fatal. Mm-hmm. You don't get a second chance. Nothing else is even close. So the breakdown in our country, and it's similar here for our state of Colorado, is at least 50%. I've seen 55% of suicides are gun-related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw this. I copied some articles and studies before I started recording this morning. This is from the Stanford Medicine newsletter from June 2020. Men who own handguns are 8 times more likely to die of gun suicides than men who don't own handguns. Women who own handguns are 35 times more likely than women who don't. And I knew those numbers were high, but again, I think this speaks to this issue of means.
And sheer access to a firearm. So where, 3 to 5 times more likely to die of a gun suicide, of a firearm if there's simply a firearm in the home is quite startling on a number of levels. But we know that surviving one can make all the difference. And 90% of those who are survivors in terms of, serious suicide attempts, they take advantage of the chance at life and they don't go on to die by suicide in subsequent attempts. So I think that's also important to talk about, this idea of delaying access and recognizing that safety and true safety in your home, because we've been told as a culture in the United States that having a gun means protection of property and protection of self and self-defense. The Supreme Court Heller decision in 2008 really was, looking at that, the individual right to own a firearm for self-defense purposes. But in less than 1% of firearm incidents in this country is it determined to actually be a matter of self-defense.
1%.
100%.
So 99% of the time that a gun is fired, it's not a self-protection thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not surprising and also astonishing. I used to give a talk. I stopped giving it because people were so disturbed by it. But I used to give a talk on suicide. I gave it at CSU a few times, and I gave it in a community group once. But it was, as I opened the talk, I was talking about suicide and means. And I said, let's imagine that a marauding army is coming, and they're going to be here in 15 minutes. And when they get here, they're going to rape you and burn you alive. So you have 15 minutes to quickly kill yourself. And the reason I chose 15 minutes, and it'd been a while since I looked at this data, but I just pulled out a couple studies. This is from Clinical Psychology and Psychotherapy from 2021. They looked at 118 inpatients who survived suicide. 36% reported that there was less than 5 minutes elapsed between their decision to kill themselves and their attempt. 44% of them, less than 10 minutes, and 73% of the people said it was less than 2 hours. Another study, this was 82 inpatients. This is from Journal Clinical Psychiatry, 2009. Of these 82 inpatients, half the patients reported that their suicide attempt evolved within 10 minutes or less. And so anyway, back to my talk, what I tell people is imagine you could be at home, you could be at work, you've got 15 minutes to kill yourself before this marauding army comes. And I let them think about it for a little while, and I have to say, what would you do? And then I solicit input. And basically what it comes down to, if people are honest, the people that have guns, I'd shoot myself. The people without guns are completely flummoxed, befuddled. Are they going to take a bunch of ibuprofen? That's not going to work. Are they going to take a bottle full of Tylenol? That's not going to work. Are they somehow going to learn how to tie a noose, find an appropriate beam, climb? No. I mean, the reality is, a huge percentage of suicide attempts and completed suicides are very impulsive. And unless you have a gun, there's really no good way to do it, because most people are not going to jump off the roof of their house or lay in front of the train. Most people are looking for something in the home. And unless you have the gun, there's really no way to do it quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, and when we think about young people, and Dave brought this up about the, leading cause of death in our country, our firearms, in young people, and thinking about, we hear of these tragedies in the news where the individual will, in a place of anguish and suicidality, and tragically being in a place of being homicidal as well, will take out others and then turn the firearm on themselves. But the access point often is within their own home, that they're gaining access to said firearm. This came up recently in the Evergreen shooting, where it was discovered that the individual, the shooter, took a firearm that was a family heirloom from a place that the family thought was securely stored, and it turned out that it wasn't, and it very quickly turned into a tragedy. So it's about access, and in our country, we have made firearms very accessible. And I think that goes to educating folks about the real facts out there, that they have an opportunity to consider protecting themselves from their future self in crisis. Because it's hard, as we know, to predict when those places of despair are going to come. But there really is this place of saying, I'm going to waive that right that I've been told is so protective, which is actually a misconception, that you're actually safer with a gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dave?
I want to comment on the story you just told, Craig. I'm impressed that you were doing that lecture, and maybe not too shocked that they told you to stop it. I give a disclaimer when I'm giving talks on gun violence as a whole, and I call it a trigger warning, essentially, that you're going to feel your anxiety go up. You're going to feel your heart rate go up. And I'm struck, as enlightened, hopefully, we're becoming, especially as a mental health field, but perhaps as a society, we have a long way to go, that people can talk about it. How would you kill yourself? And I'm struck, having mostly worked in interdisciplinary teams, in a primary care setting in my career, to observe my non-mental health trained providers and clinicians and team members ask about it. And how often I hear the question, "You're not suicidal, are you?" Which invites, of course, the patient to say no.
It's like, you don't do meth, do you?
Because you're signaling to your client, the person you're trying to help, that you really don't want to hear about it. Mm-hmm. And it's true both for suicide and homicide. And I think, guns in general, people get anxious. People don't want to think. People want to cling to what they believe.
We're so deep in this, working with people for years, in and out of suicidality. But I have to admit, part of me wonders, how is it that all these American homes have loaded guns in them, and often children? And that doesn't, these are people often worried about, make sure my kids don't get abducted, or are my kids safe to walk to school? And there's loaded guns in the home. And that's for protection for intruders with the children in the home. I just don't, it's such a different way of thinking.
We have to kind of take the layer back and talk about fear and what drives individuals to a firearm purchase in the first place. The 1960s and 70s, you'd walk into a gun shop in our country and it was hunting rifles. And by and large, the majority of firearms sold were sport shooting, going out and getting the next buck for the holiday. But it's transformed over the last 30 to 40 years in our country of this idea of self-protection. And I believe that there are, when we think about the pandemic being a pivotal point where folks were really under a lot of pressure to this idea of, okay, I need to make sure the pantry is stocked full. I need to make sure we're safe. We have this unknown virus that is affecting everyone. Somehow in our country, it extended to guns and purchasing firearms. So in the first year of the pandemic, there was a 60% increase in gun sales in our country alone. And we think about the subsequent outcomes of that and increases in deaths by firearm in children, in folks over the age of 70, the impulsivity and having that firearm in the home, the sheer increase in firearms alone after the pandemic. It's not coincidental that we have this significant increase in unintentional injuries with children and firearms, and then the risk and outcome with mass shootings that we hear about, school shootings, where 78% of firearms that they're determined to be within either the home or a family member or relative that the individual obtains that firearm. So I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah, I think that's so scary and interesting to contemplate that handgun sales went up so much during COVID. You know what else skyrocketed during COVID was alcohol use and Adderall prescriptions. I don't know if those are correlated at all, but I know that's one of the reasons it's been so hard to get Schedule II stimulants is because, you think of that, guns, alcohol, and stimulants went crazy. Dave's got something to say to that.
I just want to add in, I appreciate what you're both saying. There was a writer, psychiatrist in one of our psychiatric newsletter said that in a pandemic, everything gets worse. So benzo prescriptions probably also
Good point.
skyrocketed. I haven't checked, but anyway. I think about this difference in how gun owners versus non-gun owners view the world a lot. And I think about my own family. We have people in the military. We have people on, both ends of the political spectrum. We make it through the holidays okay. And I love and adore all of them. And we sometimes try to talk about these things. I work with Colorado Ceasefire, and I joined that group after the Parkland shooting in 2018. And I had little kids in school myself. They're older now, obviously. And watching those children at that high school in Florida be the ones to step up and say, why are we having to do this? Where are the adults? Shamed me. And I said, no way, I'm going to get involved. So testifying at the Capitol on various bills is always interesting. And I invite anybody and everybody to think about doing that sometimes, to really participate in our democracy that way, and to see the different points of view, which, could not be more violently opposed. Forgive the term. There was a woman testified before me one time, this was probably in 2019, maybe about the red flag law, the ERPO law, and she challenged the legislators. She said, I think this problem breaks one way or the other depending on which end of a gun you expect to find yourself. And I love that comment, and I think often about that also. I think also when you think about us as Americans compared to other countries across the world, I believe most other countries see a firearm as something dangerous. We're going to watch out for that. It needs to be managed. It needs to be secured. And it's seen as a risk item. Here, very often, we see it as a source of safety. This is going to make me safe. And one of the challenges with firearms in the home when somebody is in a crisis or there's kids around is that I'm getting a sense that many gun owners will say, well, I need it loaded. Well, I need it handy. And that's when the risk goes up, as we've been talking about. There is data starting to come in, and we always advocate strongly, especially from Colorado Ceasefire and others, advocacy groups like Everytown and Gabby Giffords and et cetera. Safe storage, gun locks, gun safes, et cetera. And that's obviously a difficult sell, given these different viewpoints and different ways of looking at the world and looking at issues of safety.
I've often wondered, just back to this idea of loaded guns in the house and kids. I have called CPS, Child Protective Services, a couple times when actually the teenagers told me about the loaded guns all through the house and how scary it was to them because they were so frightened that they would shoot themselves. I can think of twice that's happened in my career. It makes me think, how many times was that happening that I didn't know about? But I remember calling one of these sets of parents, and they were a little put off by that. I said, you either got to change this or I'm going to report you to Child Protective Services. And they said, well, we need these guns for protection and the kids know not to touch them. I reminded them that their daughter that I was seeing had been very, very suicidal and hospitalized before. So eventually they did lock up the guns. But yeah, part of me just thought, wait, are we even seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think about the secondary kind of effects and the psychological impact and consequences on these kids and teens. And having worked in the university clinic, and granted, I'm a veteran myself. I served in the Navy from 2001 to 2008, never being exposed to direct fire or I was never in a combat zone. I was deployed, but never having experienced that in the military setting and coming home. I wasn't expecting that it was going to be in a university clinic that I would learn about the impact of gun violence, and a couple of students having endured the Arapahoe High School shooting that happened, and their stories of telling me that they went months with being hardly able to sleep, and they were, one of them was on the campus, the other one was in the classroom next door. And the post-traumatic stress of this and the ripple effect. And I think what we don't often talk about as well is that it's not only an enduring, lasting impact on families, but it's an enduring, lasting impact on the immediate community. In this case, it was the school community of kids. And we know there's a greater risk of future suicide, kind of that ripple effect with individuals that have been exposed. And it doesn't even have to be in the immediate context of witnessing. So we talk about, as clinicians, ACE scales, the adverse childhood events. And I really, after going through my own grieving process, having described that, the student that I tragically, in our whole community at the clinic, lost in 2016, I really did a lot of reflection on, and I started to feel angry, actually, when I started looking at other countries and the safety mechanisms that they have in place in other countries with regard to firearm licensing, showing that you're equipped and in, quote unquote, the right headspace to operate a firearm, that we weren't doing in our country. And I realized that there are prevention measures that we could take. And that's where Donna's Law came up as an option.
Why don't we shift into talking about Donna's Law and trying to decrease access to means for people who are at highest risk? Because I think part of me wants to talk about what are they doing in Europe, and gosh, why can't we do that? And this is not going to happen. So, I think there are some things happening in the U.S. in certain places to try to limit access to guns to the highest risk people, and Donna's Law is one of those. So I wonder if the two of you might let us know, what is this? Why is this something that we should be hopeful about?
Sure. So I think about Donna's Law as an option, self-exclusion intervention for individuals, similar to when someone is struggling with gambling and can sign up for, a voluntary kind of self-exclusion, so they aren't entering into casinos, and then they've got the insight and the agency to protect themselves because they know it's a compulsive habit, and they know that not only are they going to drain their bank account, but they're going to really harm other people in their immediate surroundings. That really Donna's Law is an opportunity, an intervention for individuals to take the step to protect themselves if they know they have struggled with suicidal thoughts. There are many conditions, as we know. Bipolar is the first one to come to my mind. But I think, looking at substance use conditions where there can be periods of stability and individuals are doing well, and then they struggle with relapse, where they know that they're in this space of stability and they can potentially take that step to protect themselves. Donna's Law allows them to sign up for essentially a do not sell list that interfaces with the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, our database in our country that is used by federal licensed gun shops. It's a check system to see if individuals are prohibited from a firearm purchase. And they are signing themselves up. It's a confidential option, and it's fully reversible. And that's the other piece that I think is important to bring up. It's voluntary. No one else is signing them up. This is really coming from themselves and that own that insight when they're doing well.
Yeah. So in brief, Donna's Law is a voluntary, do not sell a gun to me within a certain time period list.
That's right.
Yeah. Dave, what are your thoughts on Donna's Law and how it might fit in the bigger picture of trying to prevent gun suicides?
Well, I was thrilled when I knew that last year Ginny and Senator Kit here locally were advocating for this, and me and our group, Ceasefire, jumped to try to help. And I think that's where I met Ginny, was testifying for that bill last year. And from my perspective, any tool that we can employ, anything we can turn to, any way we can empower our clients is helpful, given the barriers, the obstacles, the broad societal and cultural things that we're up against. So, despite the tragic loss of Donna and what her daughter has been doing, which I'm also so thankful for, to advocate for this, it was easy to want to get on board and support that. I want to add that I've always, maybe it's, I never want to be a cynic, but I do want to be a skeptic. I cast a side eye very often on what we're trying to do as a field and what we're compelled to do to maintain the standard of care. Sometimes I worry that we're forgetting the patient and we're forgetting the person. For example, the check boxes we have to do with the Columbia suicide scale, what have you, the steps we always want to be aware of to do a good assessment and really understand someone's risk of suicide, all that is great. But there was a study out of Sweden, and I love this lady's name, Siv Hildeberg. It's a meta-analysis from 2017, and she looked at the way inpatient psychiatric hospitals really help people who are struggling with suicide. Is it that they're locked up? Is it that they get the best meds? Is it that they have the best assessments? No. It's three things: connection, protection, and control. When patients feel like their clinicians, their professionals that they choose to work with or compelled to work with really care, that is a good start. When they know that those professionals are competent and can help protect them against some impulses that are really scaring them, then that's also comforting, of course, and effective. But lastly, when clients, even when they're held involuntarily in a hospital, feel like they have some say in their treatment. They're not just treated as the patient, et cetera. How do you want this to go? What are your plans? What do you think is going to work best? And Donna's Law does that, and that's what it's about, is empowering a person with their own life. As a field, I think we're really challenged of how much can we really do, as we've talked about this today. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the overriding, fascinating, but also devastating aspects of suicide. Can any of us, can any one person really help somebody stay alive? And obviously any tool, anything that helps us is welcome.
Mm-hmm. We might think that, if you don't work in the field, you might think that suicidal people, maybe they're just going to eventually do it, or, is this Donna's Law really going to do anything because it's voluntary? But I think something that sheds light on this is the famous Golden Gate Bridge study from a few decades ago. And many listeners may know of this study. There's a whole bunch of profound things that came from it. But they looked for all the people who'd been pulled off the Golden Gate Bridge and prevented from jumping. And then they actually found, I think of whatever, I'm making these numbers up, there's something like of the 80 or 100 people that jumped and survived. They found a number of them and interviewed them. But relevant just to what you were saying, Dave, and about Donna's Law, they asked the people who survived, when you jumped, what did you think? What went through your mind? And the number one thing that went through their mind was, oh no, what have I done? What have I done? Which to me suggests that even the people most bent on suicide, people who drove to the Golden Gate Bridge, climbed over and jumped, that there's still a part of them that didn't want to die. So I think, as we can imagine as clinicians working with people and, again, asking about suicidal thoughts and asking about means, I've asked hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients, not only do you have access to a gun, but could you shoot yourself? Would you shoot yourself? So actually asking those questions. And then even people who are very suicidal, I think the Golden Gate Bridge shows, like there's a part of us that still wants to live even when we are plunging off a bridge to our death. And I think that's that little part of us that, the clinician with the connection and the hope could say, hey, maybe you should sign up for this list, because I know you've been really suicidal, and this would just be a way to take, impulsive gun buy off the table.
I was looking at suicide circumstances. I think a lot of times clinicians, we think of, they're not going to potentially attempt suicide unless they're currently depressed. Well, that is, yes, by and large. one of the top reasons that individuals will attempt to take their life by a gun. But they're, looking at crisis in the last 2 weeks. How many of us have been through a crisis in the last few weeks? I mean, that relates to a lot of folks. A recent physical diagnosis, it's a chronic diagnosis. History of a diagnosis of any mental health condition, that was also in the top reasons. In that piece of, like you were talking about, Dave, the autonomy of saying, I'm going to give myself a chance, and Craig, that hope of, I've had a rough few days, maybe, but let me give myself a chance to meet my future self. I think that's the most powerful piece of this, because I think the other piece that Donna's Law, allows is that when the person signs up, they can add a contact person. So it could be a friend, it could be a relative, family member, it doesn't really matter. But we know when there's accountability and connection to someone else, having a person check in on them can make all the difference. And I think that was a piece that really resonated with this legislation as well, was saying the moment that somebody signs on, they can add a contact person. When, say, they are ready, they're feeling well, they're feeling safe, they're in a good space, they're ready to come off the list, we'll have that individual contacted, and that individual will likely be checking in on them and saying, hey, notice you requested to come off the list. How are you doing? And we know that conversation alone can save a life.
So Donna's Law passed in Colorado, and it's effective in 4 other states. Is that right? What are those states?
That is correct. It's so Washington State, Virginia, Utah, Delaware in 2024, and then Colorado passed it. Mm-hmm. And the governor signed it into law in June of last year in 2025.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's so important. A lot of therapists listen to this podcast, and just knowing that this is now coming as a possibility, that as part of trying to prevent suicides, that gun suicides in particular, that you can talk to your clients, patients about that they could be on this list. Now, is it already set up in Colorado, or what's the status right now?
So it's not quite set up. We are awaiting, and we're making progress on fundraising to build the portal. The bill came with a fiscal note to develop an online portal that will be housed under the Colorado Department of Public Safety, and that will have an interface with the National Criminal Instant Background Check System. That technology needs funding, and so we're getting closer. If anyone wants to contribute to this effort, donnaslaw4co.com is the website. Any additional funds that are raised past portal will go toward awareness and education. Being that it is a new measure, we're very excited about working as a team to get the word out, because I think this really will save lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dave, you've researched this issue a lot, and you've been involved in policy. I mean, I think I asked you a similar question 3 years ago when we talked about this. I said, if you were the Colorado mental health czar, so if you were the Colorado, or even like the U.S. mental health czar, and you could make unilateral policy decisions about how to decrease guns, let's say gun suicides.
Yeah, I remember you asked me that question in 2023, and I didn't like it much then either. So I think one reason why it's a tough question is, ideals clashing against reality. And I think, as I see it, at least here locally and here in Colorado, our challenge is not just the right laws, because Colorado's done a nice job in passing some laws that help us as a society, as a state, in our communities, be more safe around each other, whether or not you own a gun. Very often, our gun-owning friends and neighbors and family members will say, "You're coming for my gun." No, we're not. We're just wanting to ensure that we can all be together and without stepping on each other's toes or worse. Gun laws that are in place are being shown, not just here in Colorado, but across the country, as being helpful, as lowering suicide rates and lowering homicide rates. Donna's law is going to enhance what's already there for the red flag laws, emergency risk protection orders, ERPOs. And interestingly, here in Colorado, since about the 4 years or so that ERPOs have been going, the emphasis has been skewing towards trying to protect people who are suicidal. Initially, it was more towards people who might be homicidal. So it looks like awareness is increasing, and 85% of people in Colorado are at least aware that we have that option also, red flag law. So that speaks to getting the word out and educating. And I think once people start to understand, often sometimes through their own experiences, that maybe I really need to rethink my beliefs and rethink my assumptions, that's when we make some progress. If I was the czar of whatever you just said, I would really try to break down barriers and get people talking. Mm-hmm. Create community centers where people who are lonely, which has been affiliated with suicide, not just in our country, but in across the world. The United Kingdom, England, Britain, has a minister of loneliness. I love that. And the website looks a little stale recently. I can't tell how much they're doing with it. But finding ways to not just treat depression and major mental illness, which is important, obviously, but to address the other factors that make life worth living, being connected, knowing that you matter, having a support system. And many of us, need more help with that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think we're probably coming to a good place to wrap up here. I wonder, Ginny, do you have any last minute thoughts or anything you want to add to the discussion today?
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak about my experience. I think that there's really an opportunity here to change the narrative about firearms, really taking a deep dive on that self-protection piece that I think that so many folks have bought into for a variety of reasons. But we know in Colorado, as I and you and Dave, we've all, and many clinicians out there, we've all lost students and patients to gun suicide. There's an opportunity to really make a difference with Donna's Law, to help people to believe in their future self and recognize that there are so many unexpected things that come up in our lives. And I think people do and will take this tool when it is offered and when it is known about, in terms of that awareness piece. And I think they will make a commitment to their future self. And that gives me a great deal of hope after enduring loss.
Yeah. I guess my final comment is, therapists out there, clinicians, be brave. I think we often, all of us, can struggle to ask the hard questions. And, I think you absolutely can save people's lives if you ask questions like, is there a gun in the home? How long would it take you to get a gun? And could you shoot yourself? Would you shoot yourself? Because it's interesting. I've been asking people that for a long, long time. And it's very bifurcated, A lot of people are like, no way. And everybody else is like, and that's the yes. And I think this ties back again to the Golden Gate Bridge study. One of the many questions they asked these people who didn't die on the bridge, they said, how did you get there? And most of them drove over the Bay Bridge. And they asked them, could you have jumped off the Bay Bridge? Would you do that? And they all said, no, not the Bay Bridge. Why? Because it had to be the Golden Gate. There is a rigidity. There's people get fixated on a way they're going to do it, and they just block everything else out, which is good, because I think so many people survive suicide because they're not really thinking clearly. And I think that's so kind of wild that people drove over a bridge that would have been arguably easier to kill themselves on because they were so fixated on this one thing. But again, if you have quick access to a gun, you don't need any plan. You don't need to drive over any Bay Bridge. You don't need to climb over any suicide barriers. You don't need to avoid any EMS workers. You can just do it. So everyone out there, clinicians, be brave, ask those questions, and you will save lives by talking with people about thought experiments about these really hard moments of hopelessness. Thank you so much, you two, for coming. This is a really hard topic and a critical topic, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
What's the take-home message here? The research is clear. Suicide is most often very impulsive, and about the only impulsive method that is consistently fatal is a gun. 30,000 people a year are dying by gun suicides in the US. I think we need to do more. I think we can do more to make it harder for people in crisis to impulsively buy guns, as well as locking up existing guns when necessary. Colorado's Donna's Law has now been fully funded, and the online portal for accessing the no-sell list should be ready to go by late 2026. I'll link to more information about Donna's Law in the show notes, as well as the Golden Gate Bridge suicide study that I mentioned earlier. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for listening.